Survivor, Game Changers Recap, Tribal Council hits all-time low. One player reveals incredibly personal information about another in a failed attempt to stay in the game. Nuku tribe returns to camp after voting off Sandra, and Debbie is wasting no time spinning a horror story about her time on Exile Island. There was no Flint, she tells them, which is true because she didn't need Flint while hanging out on a freaking yacht. They revisit the chaos of Tribal Council, and Jeff, who was clueless about what was happening, is mad at all of them, but he knows he needs to make some friends. He talks to Zeke and says they didn't need to lie to him, he would have voted for Sandra had they told him what was up. Zeke says he really wants to work with Jeff and take him to the final, and thus two parts of the Gay Man Alliance is formed. Reward Challenge. It's a complicated one. It involves unwinding very tangled ropes so that a key will drop. Then one player on each team has to untie pieces of a ladder. Two people then assemble the ladder and one player climbs up and unlocks a bag of balls. Then it's across a narrow net sling, and once they are through, a player must launch the balls toward net baskets by jumping on a sort of teeter-totter. Winners get 10 pizzas and ice-cold soft drinks. Nuku takes an early lead and Ozzy seals the deal, sinking all of the balls while Brad is still trying to figure it out for Mana tribe. Mana is more despondent about losing the pizza that we think is necessary, but on the other hand, we haven't been living out in the wild for 17 days. Siri says the game breaks you down in ways you never imagine. The pizza would have made a huge difference, she says. This game is hard, Sierra says. It's more than the hunger. Aubrey agrees. The game changes you, she says. Siri starts to cry and Aubrey joins in. Pretty soon Brad is bawling, too, talking about how when his wife, Monica, came home after lasting 39 days, she was different and he just understand it until now. Aubrey thanks him for opening up about what he's going through because no one back home knows what they deal with. Siri joins them and a strong bond is formed. Brad now has many friends. Over at Nuku, the tribe is chowing down on pizza and drinking soda. Everyone is so happy, except Jeff, who's planning on how he can rid of Ozzy. Jeff goes to Sarah and tells her how important it is to have him on the tribe when there is a merger because he has connections on Mana tribe. And by the way, let's vote off Ozzy. Sarah says with a merge getting close, it might be time to cut Ozzy's throat. Immunity Challenge. The challenge this time is on the water. 4 players from each team must dive into the water and swim to another platform, where they must pull a raft to markers on the water. At each one, someone must dive down and release a bag of boys that have letters on them. They have to do it 3 times. Once the boys are recovered, the other tribe members must use the boys to spell out a word, which we predict will be the most difficult part of the challenge. Ozzy makes short work of the diving and buoy recovery, but Jeff, Andrea, and Debbie have difficulty figuring out the puzzle, which is metamorphosis. Mana, however, figures it out quickly and wins immunity. Jeff knows he's on the chopping block and plans to do everything he can to stay in the game. When Jeff and Ozzy go to get water, the other 5 talk about who to vote off. Debbie wants to vote for Jeff, but Sarah brings up the desire to get rid of Ozzy. Zeke admits that he really likes Jeff and would want to keep him around, but maybe now is not yet the time to get rid of Ozzy. Zeke is honest when Jeff asks about his odds, but he promises he'll do what he can to save him. Jeff, however, goes to Sarah and Andrea and tells them that Zeke is working against them. Jeff tells Sarah that Zeke told him the girls would lie to him to make him feel better, which makes Sarah angry that Zeke supposedly threw them under the bus. Perhaps they need to keep Jeff and get rid of Zeke? Jeff also hints that he knows something about Zeke, and says that Zeke is not the man they think he is. Jeff promises to go to Tribal Council and raise heck. Tribal Council. Jeff Probst revisits the last Tribal Council and asks Jeff if he's still on the bottom. Jeff says he knows he's going home tonight. Debbie says when someone is that certain, she feels uneasy. Jeff says he talked to everyone. He felt like he was moving up off the bottom, but he realized things were not as he thought. There is a secret alliance between Zeke and Ozzy, and will eventually fall victim to it. He asks them to vote with him to get rid of Ozzy. There is deception in the camp, he says. Deep deception. Jeff then turns to Zeke and asks why he hasn't told them he is transgender. Zeke freezes, looking deflated. He stares straight ahead. The others immediately turn on Jeff. That's personal, they shout at him, and tell him he has no reason or right to bring that out. Andrea begins to cry. Ozzy says Jeff should be ashamed of himself. He's not playing the game, he's playing with someone's life just to win some money. Jeff apologizes and says he doesn't want to look like a villain because he's not. Probst asks Jeff if he is saying that Zeke is deceptive because he's transgender. No, Jeff says. His not telling the other players is an example of his deception. They tribe members are all horrified that Jeff has outed Zeke. That is Zeke's private life and he has a right to tell people or not. Zeke keeping that from them has nothing to do with the game or strategy. Jeff says he thought that Zeke was out and proud, but now he realizes he's made a mistake. He says he assumed that everyone in Zeke's world knew about his history. Probst calls him out saying that he couldn't have possibly have believed both things, that Zeke was open about being transgender while at the same time hiding. And Jeff didn't just tell 6 people, he told millions. Zeke says there are people who know about his long journey, but it got to a point where he stopped telling other people because it overwhelms everything people think about him. He ceases to be Zeke and becomes transgender Zeke. Sarah says she doesn't care what Jeff says, what he did was a malicious attack. She tries to talk but Jeff keeps interrupting her and says he doesn't want her to paint him as something he's not. Probst points out the irony. An emotional Sarah says she has had little involvement with the gay community where she lives in the Midwest, but she's gotten to know Zeke and to love him, and that Jeff's announcement will never change how she sees Zeke. And that makes her realize that she's grown, too. Zeke says he's no role model, but maybe something good has come from this. If someone watching the show can see a transgender man doing things like making fire and surviving all the challenges, then maybe they can take heart, too. Probst announces that there's no need to vote. They're all decided on who's going home, right? Yep, they all agree and Jeff is out of there after one last hug and an apology to Zeke. So what do you think? Should Jeff go down as the lowest of the low, or did he just make a bad decision based on his own fear of being voted off and losing his chance for the million?